and I am also starting the webinar. Yep, good to go.
Hello, and welcome back to the final day of India Science Month Online. My name is Misha, and on behalf of Team ISF, I welcome you to hear the voice of science with us. For the last 1 month, ISMO has been a one stop destination for all things science and technology, themed around space, robotics, healthcare, and science communication this year. For the last month, we have been joined with researchers, scientists, educators, teachers, students, artists, and science communicators in this month long celebration. Our attendees have tuned in from all over the world in this digital age and ranged from 3-year-old tiny tots to experienced researchers. We held interactive workshops in the morning, which covered not only do it yourself science for young ones, but also experienced science communicators and artists sharing their tips, as well as our outreach and collaborative partners teaching members of the public how to upskill themselves. Our evening sessions mostly focused on expert speakers talking about topics ranging from mathematical modeling of a pandemic and healthcare for a billion to the future of robotics and AI, as well as the future of space exploration. We've had panel discussions on myriad topics, whether it be the future of the Indian startup space or the science of sport and music. A very popular part of our sessions have been post interaction breakout rooms where a selected few members of our audience could enter a closed door meeting with our speakers and interact with them one on one. Another unique part of the festival has been the opportunity for young scientists and storytellers to actually participate and use this platform to not only present their projects or thesis, but also their science fiction stories and learn from experts in those fields. I would also be remiss to not talk about our postcard program in collaboration with Club from the Future from Blue Origin. If you missed any of our sessions or activities, don't fret. All of these have been recorded and can be available for watching and rewatching at our YouTube channel by the name of India Science Festival. Our lineup for today is also extremely fascinating and engaging. We are going to start by talking about flying robots and continue on towards discussions with skills of the future, biases in STEM, before ending the day and the festival with an exciting interview with former NASA astronaut Tony England. I would also like to point out that all of our events have been and are free to attend for all. You can join us either in this webinar or watch us live on YouTube where we stream and record all of our sessions. We request you to get your friends and family to join us for these exciting sessions too. Before we begin, I would like to conduct a quick poll to understand the demographics of our audience. Shruti, can you please launch that poll for us? I request you to please answer the questions for the poll, and Shruti will summarize them for us at the end of it. Great.
Right.
We seem to have a mixed bag of attendees this time. We have a large majority of college and school students, along with some professionals in tech, as well as faculties, business owners, and a few miscellaneous other people. There is going to be another poll on your screen in just a second to understand how much our demographic knows about the topics being talked about. So please answer those questions. Fabulous. We seem to have a bunch of people who are new to the field but very curious to know about the current topic, as well as some people who have a little bit of information and have and have read a little bit about it. On that note, it is a true privilege to have with us today Professor Sebastian Scherer from the Robotics Institute at the Carnegie Mellon University. Professor, could you please switch on your video? On behalf of the team of India Science Festival, we're very grateful that you could take time out today to speak with us. And over to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thank you for listening to my talk today. Let me share my screen. Okay. So today I'd like to talk to you about flying robots. And when you think about the flying robots or drones today, often you might think about a plane flying high, or a maybe a quadcopter filming you from or some kind of far open drone shots. Here, what I want to talk to you about is what if you can get closer to things, and what if you could fly in situations that are higher risk, and you could get in trouble because you're flying close to things. And there are some problems that if they can be solved, you can really have a big impact. And so let me give you some examples. So, for example, one of the big problems due to a lot of the urbanization today is how do you move people quickly and safely? And so one answer that is very appealing is if you could fly. And so and this also has an acronym that's called urban air mobility. And so the idea is to have these electric air vehicles that can fly around cities. Also, you could think about rural areas to transport people. And so you might ask me, what's different from a helicopter? And really, the idea is that these electric planes could be much cheaper because there are fewer moving parts. But also, if you want to have a lot of them, it's very expensive to have a pilot in each of them. And pilots also can handle the density of these planes that you would think about. And so that's why you want these vehicles to be completely self-sufficient, and also just safer than a regular helicopter. Another problem is, how do you get goods quickly to people? And in particular, critical supplies such as blood, medication, vaccines, and so on are often very hard to get to in rural areas. And so that's where this area of drone delivery is very exciting. And when you think of drone delivery, you might often think in cities you'll get some packages delivered, but that is one area, but that's not necessarily going to be the first one. Now, what's difficult about this topic is that you'll have to be able to mix manned traffic with some manned traffic, meaning regular helicopters, planes, with drones, and the drones will have to be aware of all other flying things around them to avoid hitting them. And so that's called beyond visual line of sight, because typically the person on the ground makes sure that the drone doesn't hit other aircraft. Another challenge here is, how do you fly with wind? So wind can significantly affect the range, and these aircraft often have a pretty limited range. So what's kind of common between these problems is that it's really only feasible to do if you don't need a pilot or somebody monitoring each aircraft. And so they have to make decisions on their own, and we call that essentially autonomy. So let me show you one example from a couple of years ago. So here's a helicopter that's made autonomous. In the back is a computer, in the front is a sensor. That sensor scans the environment and makes sure that there are no obstacles in the way. So you can see it kind of moving back and up and down. And then somebody says, okay, I want it to land here. And then it decides, how do I get there? How do I approach? Is my landing space free? So you can see up here, this green area is what the helicopter has decided is free of space, is free of obstacles. And now the sensor is actually looking at the point where it wants to land, builds a map, and then decide, is this clear to land or not? And then also adjusts its flight path. And so this is the unique part and kind of difference between what's done today versus what these systems will have to do is, they can automatically reroute and can make decisions about changing area points to land at, for example. And then, so just to give you, and then we can get the helicopter to land. So this is just one example. And there are many ways you can do this, but there are a lot of challenges in this problem. Is, for example, helicopters have quite interesting dynamics and limits, and the paths and commands you give it are not arbitrary. Another kind of separate area. So the first area is all about how do you get something, is it people or goods, from A to B. Another big area is how do you collect data in difficult situations. And so there are many man-made things that we build, if it's wind turbines, bridges, or some facilities, are not or cannot be built with people in mind in some sense. And so, but there are things that we have to check. So it might be, for example, pipes, if they're welded well, or on bridges, it might be if there's any of rust, cracking, corrosion, or on wind turbines, it might be other things. And so it's often very difficult to get to these places. And since flying robots can, in theory, get anywhere, it's there are some big advantages to this. Another area is if you want to even if you could manually fly, it's often very difficult to control if you have obstacles and other things happening. So for cinematography, it's often difficult to control things manually. So in this area, we are looking at, how can we fly a lot of it close to obstacles, close to things, and also coordinate between different robots. Let me show you some examples for this. So here's one example of a robot that's made to do non-destructive testing. So at the end is a sensor that can measure the thickness of metal. And the drone is special in the sense that each of the propellers is tilted. So what makes that unique is that it does not have to roll and pitch when it's flying. It's more like you could think about almost like a spacecraft with little thrusters, right? So so it can just stay level. And that way it can easily contact and does not have to roll and pitch, which would move the arm at the end. So, like we said, it's often difficult to control these things manually. And so one thing we have been looking at is this idea of aerial cinematography. And so the idea is, you specify what type of shot you want, and then the robot figures out how to get the best shot, even with obstacles and changing height and so on. And so the way it works is we estimate which way somebody is looking, just based on the images, track them, and then based on a desired type of shot, then the robot will automatically optimize a route that keeps the actor in view and stays close to the viewpoint that we want. So this robot has a LiDAR scanner, which it uses to build a 3D map, and then a camera gimbal that can be used to adjust the viewpoint. So here's an example. You can see this little mound here, and the robot makes sure that it stays in front of the mound to stay in view. For us, trying to figure out which way somebody's pointing is important, heading is important, because that allows us to figure out that we can film somebody from the front or the side instead of just trying to follow them. So in this situation, the robot actually picks between different viewpoints automatically, and this is done based on the terrain and something we learned, and we learned how to pick a good shot based by training with feedback from other users. So we had people rate different shots and say, okay, this is this interesting or not interesting, and then we learned a policy, and then this policy runs on the robot. Now, next, I'd like to talk to you about a different area of challenging data collection, and this is something we're involved in right now. That's called the DARPA Subterranean Challenge. So let me first tell you a little bit what the challenge is. So you might be familiar with some of the autonomous driving challenges, and just to kind of give you a little bit of a history here, in 1986 were some of the first autonomous cars in some sense. And then DARPA had a set of challenges, the Grand Challenge and the Urban Challenge. And really after the Urban Challenge is when the whole self-driving car boom took off. And if you look at it, underground exploration has had a similar kind of history. And we hope that by the end of the challenge, which is in September this year, we will have similar reliable exploration with teams of robots. So what is the challenge about? So the goal is to rapidly gain situational awareness in an underground situation, which means you want to have a map and you want to know where objects are. And there are three different types of environments. There are tunnels, an urban environment, and a cave environment. And so you have many challenges there. There's no GPS. There's no light. It's dark. It's very difficult to communicate. and in its difficult terrain and quite large. So here are some of our competitors. So there are teams from around the world participating in this challenge. Our team is a joint team between Carnegie Mellon University and Oregon State University, and we have several sponsors. So what is the goal of the challenge? The goal is to find and classify and localize as many objects within an hour as possible. And so there are different types of objects, so things like cell phone, backpack, people, drills, fire extinguishers, and so on. So let me tell you a little bit about how we attack this challenge. So we have a team of ground robots and drones. And so these robots that we built specifically for this challenge. And then each of the ground robots also carries these communication nodes. And these communication nodes are used to create a network that the robots can communicate with. And as any robot, we have 3 different areas. So we have to perceive our environment. Then, based on what we see, we make decisions, and then execute those decisions. One other thing that's unique is that there's only one operator allowed for however many robots we want to have. So each of the robots has to be quite autonomous. And to make our system resilient, we have many different robots. They are trying to have different behaviors and approaches they can use, and we try to share as many components as possible between them. So one of the problems, one of the perceptions problem we have to look at is how do we know where we are? And so that's also called odometry or SLAM. And so the sensors we use for this are a LiDAR scanner. So it's a scanner that gives you a sense of laser. The laser hits an object and tells you the range, and does that hundreds of thousands of times per second. And also a camera, together with an inertial measurement unit, which tells us the accelerations and angular rates. And so here's what this looks like. So in the camera, we're tracking features. So these are these little blue points. So these are things like corners and so on. And then the laser gives us also measurements. And sometimes the laser is more useful as a sensor, and sometimes the cameras are more useful. It depends on the geometry of the scene. Is it narrow? Is it open? Is it dark? And so on. And so based on this, we can know where we are and build up a map. Another challenge we have to overcome. So another thing we have to overcome is to find objects. And so we use many sensors for this. We use cameras to detect objects, as well as a thermal camera and Wi-Fi sensors and gas sensors, since we also have to find gas. The gas is CO2. So here you can see an example of a backpack that we detect, and you can see it's quite challenging. It's very poor lighting. Here's one of our dummies that we detect. These are heated up, so they're actually body temperature. And here you can see a gas artifact, so the CO2. And then similarly for cell phones, we are essentially scanning for Wi-Fi access points. Then we take these measurements and create a 3D estimate for each of them. So we know where they are in the world. And so we take all of these measurements, put them together, and then come up with a final estimate. So this data is from actual competition runs. And so when we put all this together, here's how this looks like in February last year, when we were in a decommissioned nuclear power plant where DARPA had set up a challenge. So here's our ground robot exploring. This yellow fan you see, these are the potential trajectories that would it can execute. And then you can see how it's building up the map as it drives around. Then once there are some areas that are not accessible by the ground robot, and so then the drone will take off and fly from the back of the robot. So here you can kind of see what that looks like, and you know, you see kind of some of the challenges with wires and narrow spaces. So all the robots are detecting objects on board. And then this is how we've done so far. So there have been 2 circuits, a tunnel and the urban circuit. Our team came first in the tunnel circuit and then second in the urban circuit. And then the final competition is in the middle of September in Louisville, Kentucky. You know, since the cave circuit got canceled due to COVID, here are some of our own cave-like explorations. So you can kind of see some different environments that we've tested in. And in caves, since they're often very hard to navigate, I mean, even by foot, we rely very heavily on flying. And so you can kind of see how the drones are planning. They're trying to look for places to fly to that they haven't been, and then they keep track of where has the camera looked inside the 3D map. So the red areas are areas that the drone already has seen. And then they automatically land at the end, and also have a list of the locations of all the objects they find get sent to the base station operator, and the base station operator reviews them before sending them to DARPA. Now going forward, we'll extend the team even more with some slightly larger, longer flight time drones, and then we'll also add some quadrupeds. In summary, you know, we're making progress towards robust, safe, and intelligent aerial robots, but there are still many problems left to solve. Thanks, everybody, and can take some questions now.
Thank you so much, Professor. That was very, very interesting. And might I say, thank you for incorporating such beautiful visuals throughout the course of the session. I think it always helps to have a visual association with what you're hearing. And I definitely think that the visuals that you had collected for all of us made the talk a lot, a very, very engaging one. So thank you so much. So we have a bunch of questions that our attendees have put in, and I'm going to start asking you one after the other. So the first question that our attendee has posed here is, would hybrid unmanned vehicles make sense where a human takes over in challenging situations?
So in our experience, it's often too difficult to fly for a human. So I even, for example, for our testing, often if something goes wrong, there's not much the human can do because it's just too difficult, too tight to fly, too much turbulence.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
don't have enough reaction time.
Yeah. Okay. So the next question that we have here is, would small drones crashing into larger manned planes actually cause a disaster? I think that's a very interesting and pertinent question.
Yes, so there have been some studies with a smaller drone, like the size roughly, being ingested into an engine or like hitting smaller planes. And it used to be, the thinking was that it's more like a bird strike, and so but it actually seems to, depending on how it hits, can cause more damage. So it's not necessarily disaster. It all depends. You can be lucky or unlucky.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
It's like a bird strike. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. So another question that we have here is, what about the autonomous drones that are being used for, say, delivery? What sort of obstacles are you facing with delivery-based drones? Could you shed some light?
Right. So the challenge with delivery drones, there are two main challenges. So one is how do you be safe with all manned traffic around?
Yeah.
So that's one of the big challenges. So if there's, in particular, helicopters fly relatively low and at a similar height that the drones would fly at, and you have to make sure that you avoid them, and not all aircraft have to have a transponder. So it's not, you have to be able to detect them. And then the other challenge is, what do you do if something goes wrong? And so that's, the nominal part is pretty easy, right? You go, take off, fly somewhere, go down. But when something goes wrong, if you hit a bird, or if one motor fails or something happens, the drone has to make the right decisions, and there's not enough time to kind of call home and ask for help.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think delivery drones are in general the closest examples that we can think of in terms of flying robots. So that was very, very interesting. Another question that generally we tend to ask all our speakers is, what particularly drew you towards the line of research in flying robots? How did you sort of how was your career trajectory when it comes to robotics?
Right. So I think the thing that excites me a lot about robotics is in some sense there's not a lot of cheating, right? Like your robot, you put some, you develop some algorithm, you do something, you test it on your robot, and it either works or doesn't work, right? And so it's very, but when it does work, it's very rewarding, right? So it's I like this feedback, and it's very and the other part that that drew me is there's a lot of potential impact if there's something that's actually physically doing something in the world, right? It can manipulate, it can do work, it can it's pure, goes beyond software, right? So I'm more from a computer science background, but I think I really enjoy playing, working with robots.
That was definitely insightful and inspiring for a couple of our attendees who are interested in making it big in the robotics field. Okay, so another question would be, how exactly would your research pan out in the next 5 to 10 years? How do you think, what is the future of flying robots in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that that are on the horizon, is delivery drones are coming for sure, and I think a lot of the research that we are doing is so there are a lot of exciting things happening there that I think that will make it out, and some So things like the delivery drones, some of the work there will come to the drones. And in some sense, you could think about that flying in some sense is easier than driving, right? Autonomous driving is is very difficult, right? Because there's so many unknowns, there's so little structure, there's so many things that can happen. While in the air, anything that you see, you don't want to hit, right? So it's very easy. So, but the flying part is
very well
hard.
simplified. Oh, definitely. Professor, would you say, so, I mean, there's so much going on about the ethics involved in AI and robotics. So in your line of research, how actively do, say, researchers in your team invest time into thinking about the ethical implications of the research that you're putting in? Could you shed some light?
And it is definitely a big topic, and especially recently, a lot of more attention has gone to this. There are on the side that we do, a lot of what we do is what you call dual use. So you can it can be used for good and bad in some sense, or it can also be used commercially and also for military uses, right? And so it's a tricky tricky question for some of the research that we do, and what we take on as research.
Yeah, no, such an important topic that a lot of our researchers have been telling us about, especially in AI and robotics. It's quite an interesting field of research that many scientists are veering towards. So the next question that we have is, how can we bring down the costs of drones, make them more accessible?
So so in some sense, drones, depends how complex the drone is, right? So in some sense, a drone can be relatively low cost. Can you hear me? Uh-oh. Can you hear me now?
Sorry. Yeah.
I think it cut out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a technical glitch on my end. Well, yeah, do continue.
So I think for the cost of drones, so a lot of the cost of drones is driven by the sensors, and so and one of the more expensive sensors is a LiDAR scanner, and so you can replace a lot of LiDAR scanners with cameras, and cameras are relatively low cost. But cameras are often not as reliable, and so that's where we're actually spending a lot of research on, is trying to use more cameras instead of and switching away from LiDARs to reduce cost and weight.
Yeah. Okay, that was very insightful. Do you think? Okay, so what are the challenges in going from 2D spaces to 3D spaces for autonomous robots?
So so one of the very kind of basic interesting challenges is that when you're in 2D, for example, if you're trying to avoid a tree or something like this, you can go left or right. Right? When you have 3D, there's two choices. When you have 3D, you have an infinite set of choices that you can go up, you can go diagonal, you can go only right, you can go left, and so that often this ambiguity, we have to have some context to resolve that.
Sir, what would you say about the use of flying robots in other fields? For example, I mean, there's agriculture. How do you? There's obviously delivery of commodities. How do you see it pan out, say, in sports or other related fields?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of excitement and there's a lot of potential uses for these drones, like you said, in agriculture and so on. I think one of the things, there was, and I think it has slowed down a little bit, there used to, was this hype, okay, let's just solve everything with a drone. And sometimes, one of the things that's tricky is, these things are in some sense complex, right? And there are failures, and so if you can do something in a different way, carrying it on a car or carrying it by hand, and you get, the complexity goes down a lot for the same value. So that's one of the things that has happened a lot, but there are a lot of potential uses, and the more reliable and lower cost they become, the more they'll be used for this.
No, definitely. Sir, one question that we have received in our Q&A is, how do your drones react to adverse climate conditions? So are they adaptable? How would they face pollution, say extreme weather conditions? How would they adapt?
Right. So I think the two things we've looked at is dust and rain in some sense. Well, actually more snow, but yeah, it's dust and snow. So dust is a problem for these robots. Since the way these laser scanners work is you shoot out a laser beam, then you get back the range measurement. And if that laser beam hits dust, then you get a false measurement. So we have to develop some filtering algorithms for this.
Yeah, all right. How do you, your lab in particular, and I want to tell this to all our attendees that, we've linked Professor Sebastian's lab website link in the chat. So if anybody is interested in seeing the work that is being done by his research lab, please head over to the website and know more about it. So another question that we do tend to get a lot is, how often do you have PhD students coming in for research into your lab? What's the turnout on say a yearly basis?
Right. So I think per year depends a little bit. So I take on masters and PhD students, and it's maybe two to three per year, roughly. And it depends a little bit on, like, there's a little bit of cycles, like when a lot of PhD students are graduating, might be a little more, and sometimes a little less, something like this.
Definitely. Would you also say that, over the years, have you seen an influx of more students coming in to study robotics in particular, or has it been sort of constant?
I mean, there's a lot of, I think there's been a lot of interest. I mean, I think it's growing for sure, but yeah, I think there's been quite a higher interest in the last 10 years, maybe.
I mean, I do think that AI and robotics has really caught on in the past few years, and we're seeing more and more students interested in this field of research. So one question that we have received